Last fall, at an all-hands meeting and in the company newsletter, Ryan expressed his excitement for the book No Rules Rules, the Netflix playbook. In fact, he was so impassioned by the values espoused that he pronounced this book as one of the two cornerstone company texts that form, and I quote, the trunk of the tree of ideas. The book club members, page-turners if you will, promptly took it up as their next read. Did they share Ryan's enthusiasm? Let's have a listen.
So I think the thing that makes this book one of the top two, along with Positive Intelligence, is that it has a lot of great ideas, but it's also very practical. So there's like half the book is going through concrete situations and stories that happen in Netflix where they're applying, these kinds of things in action, versus, like a lot of the other books that we have that are sort of all part of what we're going for with culture, tend to be a bit more kind of, theoretical and like less sort of directly connected to the business situations that we're going to be in, and like here X, Y, Z, like here's why we did this. And so I think just as like from an onboarding perspective, if everybody reads this book, it grounds it in very concrete situations that then obviously we can keep having more debate. Like I've at no point said this is like a how-to manual per se. But I think, you need that combination of both abstract concepts and tying that into concrete situations and narratives. And certainly like the overall philosophy, I think is what we're going for. So, like talent density, giving people freedom and responsibility, as the shorthand for it. I would, if I had a shorthand for our culture, I would say it's probably trust and communication, as those are kind of the more abstract things. It's like you don't assume trust, you build trust. Like that's a different principle. But the goal is to end up with more trust kind of in the system and between people.
Here's a great example of what Ryan means by making the abstract concrete. Listen to Richard use the metaphor of a chair and its legs to draw an analogy to pillars that work together to form the foundation of an organization, and also how geographic cultural differences provide a figurative lens for adapting the Netflix examples to the Turntide context.
No Rules Rules impressed me as a book, and I would agree with Ryan that sort of the practical ways in which Reed described how they built this chair, like it's got several legs on it, and they all kind of work together to support this idea of talent density and just always getting better. So my reservations around the book are, culture is a bit like it needs to come out of the place. Like I always think about going to Paris. Like if you like the culture of Paris, you can't lift it and put it in Toronto, for example. It just won't work. There's a lot of things that allow a culture in Paris to exist the way that it does. And so that's how I think about a lot of the books that we read. It's an example of how other people do it. Now take that as a lesson and adapt it to your own case.
Here, Ryan and Eric discuss the context in which talent density is most relevant and why.
So the key thing to understand with Netflix, which I do actually think applies to most of what we do, is are you dealing in a situation that's relatively linear or really non-linear? So if you're in businesses that are information driven businesses, they tend to have very non-linear dynamics, meaning like the best engineer versus the average engineer is like 10x or more effective, versus like the best chef versus an average chef is like maybe 2x, or the best server at a restaurant or the best HVAC technician on a roof is maybe going to be like twice as fast or twice as productive. Until fairly recently, most of the world was pretty linear. Like the best farmer was twice as productive as the average farmer. Once you get into things where you have the marginal cost of reproduction trend towards zero, so how many people watch a movie, how many people use this piece of software, et cetera, These are very nonlinear dynamics. Most of what we're doing, like with Turntide, is we really want to be that super nonlinear scalable thing. We want to have the best motor in the world that's like the Lady Gaga,
It's complicated and stupid. Got my ass squeezed by
everybody listens to this one instead of the average singer. And then we can reproduce it, at a lower cost, because fundamentally the design and the information component is the really hard part to come up with. Manufacturing it is relatively straightforward. So I don't know. I mean, I'm curious if you think like there are certain elements within the company that have that sort of nonlinear dynamic that lend themselves to talent density versus some that are more like linear.
I mean, the fact of the matter is this is not a formula that could work for every company, because the basic pretext of it is you pay top of market for the best talent, and not every company can. It's literally impossible for every company to pay top of market, right? And so there's one company that pays top of market and everybody else pays less. That said, like paying top of market is one piece of this. It also works better in a world. I mean, Netflix spends, I want to say, I think it's around $9 billion a year for content. So, making like a $50 million mistake, but hey, you have a model for making mistake and making failure part of your process. Like, that's great when you have the ability, you have like the cash to be able to do that. And when they say things like the limit on what you can spend is your judgment, that's great when you have like unlimited money in the bank, depending on your life cycle. Now, Ryan and I actually talked about this the other day, because I said, like, what does it mean for a company in our life cycle? And he's like, well, like not everything applies to where we are in our life cycle. We have to provide context for this as well for us. Like, what does pay top of market mean when you're a Series A startup?
But the higher level, more abstract fundamentals behind the examples still apply in nearly all contexts. Listen to Eric explain here.
But the basis of this book, which is hire great people, we're not a family, we're a team. Make sure that people are aligned and like the best possible person for that job. And if they're not, make a change. And then trust them to like make good decisions. Part of what you're doing is not just they're doing good work, but they're making good decisions. And like a manager selects the right people and is a great manager shouldn't be making decisions all day like their people should be. Like those feel like fairly universal principles that work at any company, any stage of life cycle.
So while Netflix uses different words, they're saying the same things. They say build up, fortify, and max up talent density. We say include and grow individuals.
Yeah, it was an interesting book in that, it was this very top-down look at a culture that this person had created for his company. And I felt like there was not very much objective perspective on it. So I was like, I would really love to hear from actual employees living in this environment to see if it was really as great for them. And then I would think, oh, but they don't really care. Like, I kind of had this, it was a very mechanical view of a workplace as we need something from you. If you can't provide it, you're out of here. Goodbye, good luck somewhere else. And so I found myself being very like annoyed with each premise as they brought it up. And then it was like they were talking me away from the cliff by the end of it by explaining like more of how they did things. And I felt like, wow, that could create a very dynamic workplace. It felt very impersonal and off-putting to me.
Here's another example of Netflix saying potato while we say potato. They say increase, pump up, and max up candor. We say practice radical candor, but we certainly both mean say what you really think with positive intent. Listen to Jay, Sam, Eric, Ryan, and Richard flesh this out and adapt it to the Turntide context.
It was a really nice read. Specifically, what I connected with was the feedback bit, right? So say what you think with positive intent. I could see that becoming something that we teach, we train, we reinforce, and we use that as the foundation of communication at Turntide. I could see that being extremely useful. So I would hope that if we put in the training and the effort to create a culture of feedback where people feel really comfortable giving that feedback up, down, sideways, in all directions, then we can bring that bit of it over. That was what resonated, I think, for me the most.
I think it's important to invite people to give feedback. Otherwise, a lot of times people don't want to. One of the things, I'm going to get it wrong in the book, but where they said that we're conditioned to give feedback at the right time, you know, and think about when's the right time to give feedback. And that's you know, so I often think, you know, if we want feedback, then being the person to initiate inviting feedback is certainly a step, but it doesn't address whether or not people will actually give you the constructive feedback and whether they will be comfortable, you know, sharing with you something that maybe you're not going to take terribly well. I liked the idea of testing it, you know, saying to somebody like, come on, give me something good. Give me something that, like, you know, you think might really upset me, and let me see if I can take it. Let me see if I can handle it.
I'd say, like, one of the things that I think really matters is giving feedback in the moment. And the reason is because so I'll tell you, my personal struggle with giving feedback is I don't spend a lot of time thinking about like how another person can perform better, unless like they, like, you know, I work very closely with them every day, or they work directly for me or something like that. I don't really spend a lot of time thinking about that. And so when I get requests from somebody for feedback, whether it's in the context of like a performance review or something like that, I am usually like, I have to work really hard to come up with something because I may have forgotten if it was something that came up months ago. So I try really hard when I'm working with somebody to, if there's an opportunity for feedback, to like provide that right at the moment. And it shouldn't feel like feedback when I'm doing it. It's just like, here's how we can work better together. And I try, the people who work with me, I hope have the impression that I try to be really direct about these things. You know, I found that this, and from the other side, when I ask for feedback, how could I be like doing better? I have to be honest, I don't usually get a lot of great answers around it. And I know it's not because I'm perfect at my job. I know it's probably because it's the same situation. They just haven't spent a lot of time thinking about me, and they shouldn't really, right? And I think that's all the more reason why it's important for there to be a culture of like providing feedback in the moment when it happens, because that's when the context will be there and you can have the honest discussion.
Yeah, feedback's the important one for sure. And I'm similar to you. Like, I'm not like constantly in my head judging stuff like how could that be better. I don't know, I guess some people probably have that, but yeah, it's people ask me for feedback, it's kind of tough to just come up with stuff. So I really just want more general feedback. I mean, the thing that sort of makes me really encouraged is if I'm in a group meeting and there's like a bunch of stuff that I'm thinking to say, but then other people are saying it first. It's like, that to me means that I'm doing a good job making sure the environment is open for that.
I would say that perhaps the most important lesson I took out of the book was this notion of giving feedback. You know, say what you think with positive intent. And that struck me as something which could actually transform my relationships just in general. And I want to get good at knowing how to do that. And I think it could be one of those keystone habits that actually has a ripple-on effect. And I would never have known that without reading this No Rules. And the idea that we can all sharpen each other up is just a profound, like a profound thing that I think could really make Turntide like that could really propel us forward.
In our third and final act, let's explore the last Netflix fundamental of context over controls. On an amusing note, this principle needs to be turned on itself as the lens through which we read the book. To steal a page from Ryan, don't read the book as a how-to manual. Rather, embrace the fundamental and then adapt it for our context. At Turntide, we call this reason from first principles. To build on the tree metaphor, it means getting closer to the trunk. Listen to the crew expand on this.
What I like about sort of like the tree model that we see in this book is that the tree model is about the context. And really what matters is that you and your role are helping achieve whatever that company impact is that you're trying to get out of your role. And somebody who is like working hard but not achieving things is probably failing at their job, and that is maybe a failure of the boss for not providing the context. And someone who is like achieving things and they're not the right things, they're not making a difference, again, a failure of their manager to be able to set the right context for them. And what I love is that about this book and this model is that ultimately it's not just on the manager to determine, to like make sure that they're aligned on like doing the things that have impact, but also it's on the manager to make sure that that person maybe has like the right talent and skills in order to make that impact. And that means making decisions, like critical business decisions along the way, not just executing and doing what they're told.
When you've been involved in organizations where you can see some of the crippling, choking effects of, over-constrained controls and just, kind of unreasonable policies and inflexible things where it didn't make sense, that's the part that really appealed to me. Is it's like, just do the things that make sense. I love the, the kind of the lead by context, not by control, set up, social norms, create social norms around it. And I was really intrigued, when I joined, to see the unlimited PTO policy at Turntide or SMC. I think it's subtle, but it's important, the distinction between unlimited PTO versus a no vacation policy, right? It kind of sets the expectation. It's like, use it responsibly, use it wisely, don't abuse it. And it's, we're going to expect you to behave like, a responsible adult about it.
It was a good example of just leadership principles, right? Like leading with context. I just refer to that as painting the vision. So with my team, it's like, here's what we're doing, here's where we're going. The second part that really hit me, I was like, oh, really, really good was, and I got this earlier in my career from a director of mine, still mentor, which was make sure that your team and anyone that works with you always gets an answer, right? Always gets an answer. You either know, you don't know, or you can't tell them. So if you ever have to use that last one, I can't tell, that trust has already been built, that they respect why you might not be able to say something. And when some of those stories about layoffs and why someone was fired, that's how I would frame my answer. Like that would be my checklist of, is this falling one of these three categories? Then with Richard said, and Brad as well, part of it made me nervous because in CS, we're on a support team. We got to be available. People just can't come and say, I want to do this, I got to do this, but there's also a part of it that I've seen with my team recently take on where they'd call me after hours and go, hey, this is what happened today. Should I have done it differently? And what I liked about the book was it was a very Socratic way of leading, which is, well, what do you think now that you've had a time? And that's kind of how I have my conversations.
The not punishing the many for the mistakes of the few. I think that's one that is, that resonated for me in a much better way of dealing with or being able to have open policies or very low policies, limited policies. I think that you have to be able to deal with those that are not able to follow those instead of blankets. Not a family, a team. I think, Richard, you've probably heard me say that before. I talked about a tribe being better than a family in those sense, and team is actually even better, although we've all heard team before, and maybe we try and come up with fancier ways to say it. But that to me as well was important. So I took away from this that there were just a number of great ideas in here on things that we, could possibly try out and I'd be excited to try. But I think also really conscious that I would want us to put the Turntide spin on it.
Netflix really popularized the having no vacation policy. In the book, Hastings basically says, how do you keep the no vacation policy from becoming a no vacation policy? And I've now worked in a few environments where it was definitely like a no vacation, it became this no vacation policy, and everyone definitely took less vacation than other environments I've worked at where you had a set number of days that you got per year, and everybody was basically expected to take all those days. And so that how piece is spelled out in this book, which is that hey, executives are supposed to also take vacation and tell people they're taking vacation. Now, I have to add one other thing to this that I feel like this book didn't get into, which is a criticism I have of the book, that the executive showing off that they're doing it themselves is still not enough. And the reason is because I've worked in environments where, especially in large companies, where this idea that an SVP or an EVP is doing something, it's supposed to be proof positive that you, mid-level peon, are also expected to do it. But EVPs have wide latitude over things like their schedule that quite often junior people don't.
One of the things that originally attracted me to Turntide and still does is the passion for culture. And I think about culture as kind of like being the turbocharger on an engine. If it doesn't make the car go by itself, but it allows you to do what you do really well. Even if tomorrow, for whatever reason, I was not part of Turntide, I would be really grateful for, frankly, the knapsack of books and having read No Rules Rules. I think this is, like, in terms of a growing, it's been a fantastic thing to be allowed to talk with people in the company around culture. And I'm really grateful for that.
So I really enjoyed the book, and it left me with this question, which is, what is our unique touch on the world? Like, who are we, and how are we going to organize in order to achieve our mission? I mean, if you kind of fast forward 20 years from now, like, turning the tide on climate change, AI is going to become ubiquitous, and we have to find a way to work with AI and embed and sort of contain the impacts of AI and so forth. These are hard problems, and these are sort of hard circumstances. And while I see these, like, you know, MBM or this book providing good frameworks, the question is, what is our unique way of being and operating? And I think that's an open question that I was left with after I read this book.